The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Min-jun pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of Hanyang University's mathematics department. His footsteps echoed against the tile floor. The building was quiet at this hour. Most students had gone home hours ago. Only a few dedicated graduate students remained in the computer lab on the second floor. Min-jun was 42 years old. He had worked as a night janitor at the university for 8 years. Every night followed the same routine. He started on the 4th floor and worked his way down. Empty the trash bins. Sweep the floors. Clean the whiteboards. Mop the hallways. Lock the doors behind him as he finished each section. Most people who passed Min-jun in the hallways barely noticed him. He wore a simple gray uniform with his name tag pinned to the chest. His hair was starting to show gray at the temples. He kept his head down and did his work quietly. That was how he preferred it. But Min-jun carried a secret that no one at the university knew. Every night, as he cleaned the classrooms and offices, he read the equations and formulas written on the whiteboards. He studied the textbooks that students left behind. He examined the research papers scattered on professors' desks. Mathematics was his passion. It had been for more than 20 years. Min-jun had grown up in a small village outside Seoul. His family was poor. His father worked in a factory. His mother cleaned houses. They had 4 children, and Min-jun was the oldest. He had been a bright student in school. His teachers told him he had a gift for numbers. They said he could go to university someday. But when Min-jun was 17, his father became sick. The medical bills piled up quickly. The family needed money. Min-jun dropped out of high school and found work at a construction site. His dream of university disappeared. His younger siblings needed to eat. The family needed to survive, yet Min-jun never stopped loving mathematics. He spent his small earnings on used textbooks from street vendors. He studied at the public library on his days off. He taught himself algebra, then geometry, then calculus. Each new concept felt like opening a door to another world. The numbers made sense to him in a way that nothing else did. When he was 34, Min-jun saw a job posting for a janitor at Hanyang University. The pay was decent. The hours were night shifts, which meant his days would be free. He could continue his studies. He applied and got the job. Working at the university changed everything for Min-jun. Suddenly, he was surrounded by mathematics. It was written on every whiteboard. It filled every textbook in every classroom. The professors discussed complex problems in the hallways. The students worked through equations at the tables in the common area. Min-jun cleaned around them quietly. He listened. He observed. He learned. On this particular night, Min-jun reached the office of Professor Choi Sung-ho. Professor Choi was the most famous mathematician at Hanyang University. He had published dozens of papers. Students competed to get into his classes. Other professors spoke his name with respect. Min-jun knocked softly on the door. No answer. He pulled out his key ring and unlocked the door. The office was dark. Professor Choi had already gone home for the night. Min-jun turned on the light and stepped inside. The office was cluttered with books and papers. 3 large whiteboards covered the walls. They were filled with equations and diagrams. In the center of the main whiteboard, one formula stood out. It was circled in red marker. Question marks were written next to it. Lines crossed out previous attempts at solving it. Min-jun set down his cleaning supplies and moved closer to the whiteboard. His eyes scanned the formula carefully. It was a complex problem involving fluid dynamics. He recognized parts of it from his studies. It looked like an attempt to optimize the Navier-Stokes equations for a specific application. The Navier-Stokes equations described how fluids moved. Water flowing through pipes, air moving around airplane wings, blood flowing through veins. These equations were fundamental to physics and engineering, but they were also incredibly difficult to work with in real-world situations. Min-jun could see what Professor Choi was trying to do. He was attempting to simplify the equations for a particular case. This would make calculations faster. It would help engineers design better systems. But there was a gap in the logic. Something was missing in the middle steps. Min-jun knew he should start cleaning. He had 20 more offices to finish before his shift ended at 6 a.m., but he could not look away from the whiteboard. His mind was already working on the problem. He pulled the worn notebook from his pocket. This notebook went everywhere with him. Its pages were filled with his own calculations and notes. He sat down in Professor Choi's chair and began working. He wrote quickly, checking his logic at each step. He tried one approach, then another. The first method led to a dead end. The second method showed promise but became too complicated. An hour passed. Then another. Minjun barely noticed. He was lost in the mathematics. This was when he felt most alive. When he was solving problems, nothing else mattered. Not his uniform, not his job title, not his lack of formal education. In the world of numbers, only logic mattered. Finally, at 2:30 a.m., something clicked. Minjun saw a different way to approach the middle section of the problem. Instead of trying to simplify directly, he could transform the variables first. This would make the equation easier to work with. He checked the math 3 times. It worked. He had solved it. Minjun stared at his notebook. His heart was pounding. The solution was elegant. It was simpler than what Professor Choi had been attempting. It would work for the practical applications the professor needed. But what should he do now? He was just a janitor. Professor Choi was a famous mathematician. What right did he have to write on the professor's whiteboard? What if he was wrong? What if he had made a mistake in his calculations? He would look foolish. He might even lose his job for touching the professor's work. Minjun stood up and returned to his cleaning cart. He emptied the trash bin. He swept the floor. He tried to forget about the formula, but his eyes kept returning to the whiteboard. The solution was right there in his notebook. It seemed wrong to keep it hidden. For the next 2 weeks, Minjun entered Professor Choi's office every night. Each time he saw the formula still circled in red. The question marks remained. New crossed-out attempts appeared. The professor was still struggling with it. Minjun's solution sat in his notebook, unused. On the 14th night, Minjun made a decision. He would write his solution on the whiteboard. If it was wrong, the professor would simply erase it. If it was right, perhaps it would help. He would write small in the corner. He would not sign his name. Minjun picked up a piece of white chalk. His hand trembled slightly as he approached the board. He found an empty space in the bottom right corner. He began to write. Each step of his solution went onto the board in neat, careful handwriting. When he finished, Minjun stepped back. His solution was there, small but complete. He felt a mix of fear and excitement. Then he grabbed his cleaning supplies and quickly finished his work. He left the office and locked the door behind him. As he pushed his cart down the hallway, Minjun wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. By tomorrow, Professor Choi would see what he had written. What would happen next? Minjun had no way to know. He had changed something, though. For the first time in his life, he had allowed his mathematics to exist outside of his private notebook. That small act of courage would change everything. Professor Choi Sung-ho arrived at his office at 7:30 a.m. He had barely slept. The formula had kept him awake again. For 3 weeks, he had been working on this problem. It was part of his research into fluid dynamics optimization. If he could solve it, the applications would be significant. Better engine designs, more efficient water systems, improved medical devices, but the solution kept slipping away from him. Every approach he tried led to complications. The math became too messy. There had to be a simpler way, but he could not find it. Professor Choi unlocked his office door and dropped his briefcase on the desk. He barely glanced at the whiteboards at first. He went to start his coffee maker. Only when he returned with his cup did he notice something different. There was new writing on the main whiteboard, small handwriting in the bottom corner. He moved closer, squinting at it. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Someone had written a complete solution to his problem. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. The steps were laid out clearly. Professor Choi set down his coffee and grabbed his reading glasses. He began checking the math line by line. The first step used a variable transformation he had not considered. Clever. The second step simplified the resulting equation. Very clever. The third step brought it all together. The solution was elegant. Beautiful, even. Professor Choi felt his pulse quicken. He grabbed a marker and began verifying each step on a different whiteboard. He worked quickly, his years of experience guiding him through the calculations. 20 minutes later, he stood back and stared at his verification. The solution was correct. Completely correct, but who had written it? Professor Choi examined the handwriting again. It did not match any of his graduate students. The writing was too careful, too deliberate. Most students wrote quickly on whiteboards. This person had taken their time. He checked his desk calendar. Yesterday had been Monday. He had left the office at 8 p.m. His research team had left before him. The building should have been empty except for security and cleaning staff. A student must have come back late to study. Perhaps someone who was working on a related problem. They must have seen his formula and decided to help. But why not sign their name? Why write so small in the corner? Professor Choi spent the morning asking his graduate students about the solution. He gathered them in the conference room. 6 students sat around the table looking confused. "Did any of you enter my office last night?" Professor Choi asked. They shook their heads. One student, a young woman named Ji-won, spoke up. "Professor, the door was locked when I left at 7 p.m. I tried to get my notebook from your office, but you had already gone." "Did anyone work late in the building?" "Did you see anyone near my office?" More headshakes. One student mentioned seeing a janitor mopping the floors around 11 p.m. That was all. Professor Choi dismissed them and returned to his office. He sat at his desk, thinking. The mystery bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Someone in this building had the skill to solve a problem that had stumped him for weeks. Someone with significant mathematical ability. He needed to know who. That afternoon, Professor Choi called campus security. They checked the security footage from the previous night. The cameras covered the hallways, but not the inside of individual offices. The footage showed Professor Choi leaving at 8:03 p.m. It showed the janitor entering the hallway at 11:52 p.m. with his cleaning cart. The janitor entered each office, including Professor Choi's, and came out several minutes later. "Can you zoom in on the janitor?" Professor Choi asked the security guard. The guard adjusted the video. The janitor's face became clearer. He was middle-aged Asian wearing a gray uniform. His name tag read Min Jun. "That is Min Jun," the guard said. "He has worked here for many years. Very quiet man. Good worker." Professor Choi thanked him and left the security office. He walked slowly back to the mathematics building. A janitor. Could a janitor have solved his formula? It seemed impossible. Janitors cleaned floors and emptied trash. They did not work on advanced mathematics problems, but someone had solved it. And the security footage showed that only the janitor had been in his office after he left. Professor Choi decided to run a test. He would leave another unsolved problem on his whiteboard. This time he would tell no one about it. If the same person solved it, he would know the previous solution was not a coincidence. He would know he was dealing with someone with real mathematical ability. He spent an hour selecting the right problem. It needed to be challenging but not impossible. He chose a problem involving recursive sequences and convergence. It was a different area of mathematics than the first problem. This would test the breadth of the mystery mathematician's knowledge. Professor Choi wrote the problem on his whiteboard. He deliberately left spaces where someone could write a solution. Then he left his office at 8 p.m. just as he had before. He told his graduate students he would be gone for the evening. He said nothing about the new problem. That night, Min Jun pushed his cleaning cart toward Professor Choi's office with a feeling of dread in his stomach. He had not returned to that office since writing his solution 2 weeks ago. He had been too afraid. What if the professor had been angry? What if there had been complaints? Min Jun had switched his route, cleaning Professor Choi's office at different times, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But tonight, his supervisor had reminded him that all offices needed to be cleaned on schedule. Min Jun could not avoid it any longer. He unlocked the door with shaking hands. The office was dark and empty. Min Jun turned on the light. His eyes immediately went to the main whiteboard. His solution was still there. It had not been erased. In fact, Professor Choi had drawn a small star next to it. Next to the star, in red marker, were the words, "Correct." "Who are you?" Min Jun's breath caught. The professor had seen it. The professor knew someone else had written it. And the professor wanted to know who. Min Jun felt panic rising in his chest. He should not have written anything. He should have kept his mathematics private in his notebook where it belonged. Now the professor was looking for whoever had done this. If Professor Choi discovered it was just a janitor, he would be angry. He might think Min Jun was mocking him. He might complain to Min Jun's supervisor. Min Jun decided he would never write on a whiteboard again. He would clean the office and leave. He would forget about mathematics for a while. It was safer that way, but then his eyes moved to the right side of the whiteboard. There was a new problem written there. A problem about recursive sequences. Min-jun recognized it immediately. It was a beautiful problem, the kind that had multiple layers. You had to understand patterns. You had to see how each term related to the others. Min-jun tried to focus on his cleaning. He emptied the trash. He swept the floor. But the problem stayed in his mind. As he worked, he thought about possible approaches. Recursive sequences could be tricky. Sometimes the pattern was obvious. Sometimes it was hidden in the mathematics itself. He pulled out his notebook, just to sketch a few ideas, he told himself, just to see if he could find the pattern. He would not write anything on the whiteboard. He would simply solve it for his own satisfaction. Min-jun worked in his notebook for 40 minutes. The problem was challenging. He tried 3 different approaches before finding one that worked. The sequence converged, but the limit was not immediately obvious. He had to use a technique involving comparison to a known convergent series. When he finished, Min-jun looked at his solution with pride. It was correct. He was certain of it. The proof was complete in his notebook. He stood up and grabbed his cleaning supplies. He would leave now. He would not write anything on the board. He would not give himself away. But as Min-jun reached the door, he stopped. He looked back at the whiteboard, at the problem waiting there, at the question the professor had written, "Who are you?" Maybe the professor was not angry. Maybe the professor was simply curious. Maybe he wanted to understand how someone had solved his problem. The star next to Min-jun's solution suggested appreciation, not anger, and this new problem felt like an invitation. Like the professor was asking if the first solution had been luck or skill. Like he was reaching out across the whiteboard to another mathematician, regardless of who they were. Min-jun made a decision. He would solve this problem too. He would write his solution on the board. He would show the professor that it had not been luck, that whoever had helped him was someone who truly understood mathematics, but he would still not sign his name. Not yet. He was not ready for that. Min-jun picked up the white chalk. He found a space below the new problem. He began copying his solution from his notebook onto the whiteboard. His handwriting was the same as before. Neat, careful, small enough to be humble but clear enough to read. When he finished, Min-jun stepped back. 2 solutions now existed on this whiteboard, both from him, both anonymous. He cleaned the rest of the office quickly. Then he left, locking the door behind him. As he pushed his cart down the empty hallway, Min-jun felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Professor Choi arrived at his office before sunrise. He had not slept at all. The previous evening, he had left the new problem on his whiteboard. All night he had wondered if his mystery mathematician would solve it. Part of him hoped they would. Part of him feared they would not. If they did not solve it, perhaps the first solution had been a lucky guess. If they did solve it, he was dealing with someone extraordinary. He unlocked his office door and turned on the light. His eyes went immediately to the whiteboard. There, beneath the problem about recursive sequences, was a new solution. Written in the same small, neat handwriting, the same careful style. Professor Choi dropped his bag and rushed to the board. He read through the solution without even taking off his coat. The approach was different from what he would have used. The unknown mathematician had employed a comparison technique that was both creative and efficient. Professor Choi worked through each step mentally. It was flawless. This was not luck. This was genuine skill. Professor Choi sat down at his desk and put his head in his hands. Who was this person? They had now solved 2 completely different problems, one in fluid dynamics, one in sequence analysis. This suggested broad mathematical knowledge, graduate-level understanding at minimum, possibly higher. But who would solve problems anonymously? Who would write in tiny letters in the corner of a whiteboard instead of claiming credit? It made no sense unless they could not claim credit, unless there was a reason they needed to remain hidden. Professor Choi thought about the security footage. The janitor entering his office late at night. The janitor named Min-jun. Could it be possible? Could a janitor have this level of mathematical ability? He needed proof. Direct proof. Not just solutions on a whiteboard. Professor Choi made a decision. He would wait in his office during the night shift. He would see who came to clean, and if they approached his whiteboard, he would know the truth. That evening, Professor Choi told his wife he would be working late at the university. He often did this so she did not question it. He went to his office at 7 p.m. and settled in to wait. He turned off the main light and left only his desk lamp on. He positioned himself so he could see the door and the whiteboards. He brought work to keep himself busy. Papers to grade, research articles to read, but he found it hard to concentrate. He kept checking his watch. According to the security guard, the janitor usually reached this floor around midnight. The hours passed slowly. Professor Choi drank coffee to stay awake. At 11:30 p.m., he heard footsteps in the hallway. The squeak of wheels. A cleaning cart. Professor Choi quickly turned off his desk lamp. He moved to a corner of the office where he would be less visible in the darkness. His heart was pounding. There was a soft knock on the door. Then the sound of keys. The door opened. A figure entered the dark office and reached for the light switch. Professor Choi spoke before the light came on. "Please do not be alarmed. I am here." The figure jumped and made a startled sound. Professor Choi quickly turned on his desk lamp. In the dim light, he saw a middle-aged man in a gray janitor uniform. The man's face showed pure terror. His hand was still on the light switch, frozen in place. "I am sorry," Professor Choi said gently. "I did not mean to frighten you. You are Min Jun, yes?" The janitor nodded slowly. He looked ready to run. "Please do not leave. I only want to talk." "You are not in any trouble." Professor Choi gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Will you sit?" Min Jun did not move. "I should not be here," he whispered. His voice shook. "I am sorry. I will go." "Wait," Professor Choi said. He stood up and moved to the whiteboard. He pointed to the 2 solutions written in small handwriting. "Did you write these?" Min Jun's eyes went to the floor. He did not answer. "I need to know," Professor Choi said. "Did you solve my problems?" The silence stretched on. Finally, Min Jun nodded once. It was barely a movement, but it was there. Professor Choi felt electricity run through him. It was true. The janitor had solved both problems. A janitor was his mystery mathematician. How? Professor Choi asked. "How did you learn mathematics?" Min Jun still would not look at him. "Books," he said quietly. "I teach myself. From the library. From the internet. I am sorry I touched your whiteboard. I should not have. I will lose my job now." No, Professor Choi said quickly. "You will not lose your job. I am not angry. I am amazed. Do you understand? These problems are not simple. Graduate students struggle with these concepts. But you solved them. Both of them." Min Jun finally looked up. His eyes were full of fear and confusion. "I did not mean to intrude on your work. I cannot help it. When I see a problem, I must try to solve it. Mathematics is..." He struggled to find the words. "It is the only thing that makes sense to me." "Sit down," Professor Choi said again. "Please, I want to understand. Tell me about yourself." Slowly, Min Jun moved to the chair and sat on its edge, ready to flee at any moment. Professor Choi returned to his own chair. He kept his voice soft and non-threatening. "How long have you studied mathematics?" he asked. 23 years, Min Jun said. "Since I was 19. Did you go to university?" Min Jun shook his head. "I had to leave high school. My family needed money. My father was sick. I was the oldest son. But you continued learning on your own?" "Yes, I bought used textbooks. I studied at the library. When I got this job here, I could learn more. I read the books in the classrooms. I listen when professors lecture. I study the problems on the boards." Min Jun looked down again. "I know I should not. I am just a janitor. This knowledge is not for people like me." Professor Choi felt something twist in his chest. "Mathematics is for everyone," he said firmly. "Knowledge does not care about job titles or money or formal education. It only cares about understanding. And you clearly understand." Min Jun looked skeptical. "I cannot prove what I know. I have no degree, no certificates. Just my notebook." "Your notebook?" Min Jun hesitated, then slowly pulled a worn notebook from his pocket. The cover was bent and the pages were yellowed. He placed it on the desk but did not let go of it. "May I?" Professor Choi asked. After a long moment, Min Jun released the notebook and pushed it across the desk. Professor Choi opened it carefully. The pages were filled with equations, diagrams, and solutions. The handwriting was the same as on his whiteboard. Every page showed complex mathematics, calculus, linear algebra, differential equations, proof techniques. The work was organized and thorough. Professor Choi turned page after page. Some problems he recognized from textbooks. Others appeared to be Min Jun's own explorations. The quality of the work was exceptional. This was not the notebook of a hobbyist. This was the work of someone with deep understanding. How many of these notebooks do you have? Professor Choi asked. 14, Min Jun said. At home. I keep one with me always. Professor Choi closed the notebook and looked at Min Jun. He saw the man fully for the first time. Not as a janitor, as a mathematician who had been forced by circumstances into another life. A brilliant mind hidden behind a mop and a cleaning cart. Min Jun, Professor Choi said, what you have done is extraordinary. Do you realize that? You have taught yourself university-level mathematics, graduate level even, without teachers, without formal classes. You have learned alone, through pure dedication. That is remarkable. Min Jun's eyes filled with tears. He blinked them away quickly. But what does it matter? I cannot use this knowledge. I cannot publish papers. I cannot attend conferences. I am 42 years old with no high school diploma. This is just something I do for myself. A private thing. It does not have to be private, Professor Choi said. He leaned forward. You solved my problems. Problems I had been working on for weeks. Your solutions were elegant. Better than what I would have found eventually. That means you are contributing something valuable. Your mathematics has worth. No one will care, Min Jun said. I am nobody. I care, Professor Choi said. And others will care too. But first I need to understand the full extent of your knowledge. Can you solve other types of problems? Not just the ones I showed you? Min Jun nodded. I can try. I have studied many areas. Topology, number theory, analysis, algebra. Some areas I know better than others. Professor Choi stood up and went to his whiteboard. He erased a section and wrote a new problem. This one involved abstract algebra, group theory. It was a problem from his own research, one he had solved years ago. He wanted to see how Min Jun would approach it. Try this, he said. Min Jun stood and moved to the whiteboard. He studied the problem for a moment. Then he picked up a piece of chalk and began writing. His movements were confident now. He was in his element. The fear had left his face, replaced by concentration. Professor Choi watched in fascination. Min Jun worked steadily, pausing occasionally to think, then continuing. He filled one section of the board, then moved to another. His solution was taking shape. 15 minutes later, Min Jun stepped back. I think this works, he said. Professor Choi examined the solution. It was correct. More than correct. Min Jun had used an approach that was actually more efficient than Professor Choi's own solution from years ago. You did not just memorize this from somewhere? Professor Choi asked. No, Min Jun said. I have not seen this specific problem before, but the technique is standard for this type of group structure. Professor Choi called an emergency meeting of the mathematics department faculty for Friday afternoon. He sent the email on Wednesday morning. The subject line read, Important discovery, full attendance required. 23 professors received the message. Most were curious. Some were annoyed at the short notice. Min Jun spent those 2 days in a state of constant anxiety. He continued his janitorial work, but his mind was elsewhere. Professor Choi had asked him to bring all 14 of his notebooks to the meeting. Min Jun had agreed, but now he regretted it. What if the professors laughed at him? What if they thought he was pretending to understand things he did not? What if they got him fired? On Thursday night, Min Jun could not sleep. He sat at his small kitchen table in his tiny apartment and looked through his notebooks. Each one represented years of work, years of studying alone, years of loving something he thought he could never truly be part of. His wife, Seo Yeon, came into the kitchen at 2 a.m. She found him staring at the notebooks with tears on his face. Come to bed, she said gently. She knew about his secret studies. She had always supported him even when they barely had money for food. Even when his notebooks cost them things they needed. I am scared, Min Jun admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I have been fooling myself all these years? So Yeon sat down beside him. That professor saw your work. He thinks you are good enough. Maybe you should believe him. He is being kind. No, she said firmly. Professors are not kind. They are honest. If he did not think your mathematics was real, he would not risk his reputation on you. He would have simply thanked you and moved on. Min-jun wanted to believe her, but the fear remained. Friday afternoon arrived too quickly. At 2 p.m., Min-jun stood outside the mathematics department conference room. He wore his best clothes, though they were old and simple. He carried a bag with his 14 notebooks. His hands shook. Professor Choi emerged from the conference room. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," Min-jun said honestly. Professor Choi smiled. "Good, that means you understand the importance of this. Come, it is time." They entered together. The room fell silent. 23 professors sat around a long table. They stared at Min-jun with confused expressions. They recognized him as the janitor who cleaned their offices. Why was he here? Professor Choi guided Min-jun to a chair at the front of the room. Then he stood and addressed his colleagues. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this meeting was called on short notice. I know some of you are wondering why a member of our janitorial staff is present. I ask for your patience and open minds. What I am about to show you will challenge your assumptions." He clicked on the projector. Images of Min-jun's solutions appeared on the screen. The fluid dynamics problem, the recursive sequence problem, the group theory problem, all written in that same neat handwriting. 3 weeks ago I was struggling with this optimization problem, Professor Choi said, pointing to the first image. I had been working on it for weeks. One morning, I found it solved on my whiteboard. I verified the solution. It was correct. It was also more elegant than anything I had attempted. Murmurs spread through the room. Professors leaned forward to see the screen better. I assumed a student had written it, but none of my graduate students claimed responsibility, so I left another problem on my board. A test, that problem was also solved. Then I solved a third problem with the person directly. All 3 solutions were correct. All 3 showed deep mathematical understanding. Professor Choi paused. The person who solved these problems is Min-jun. He works as our night janitor. He has worked here for 8 years. And he has been teaching himself mathematics for 23 years. The room erupted. Professors spoke over each other. This is a joke. Impossible. Someone must have helped him. This is inappropriate, Sung-ho. Professor Choi raised his hand for silence. I thought the same things. I was skeptical. But I have spent hours with Min-jun. I have examined his notebooks. I have watched him solve problems in real time. He is the real thing. He is a mathematician who has been hiding in plain sight. A senior professor named Dr. Kim stood up. Even if this is true, what are we supposed to do about it? We cannot simply declare a janitor to be a mathematician. There are rules, standards. He has no formal education, no credentials. This is absurd. I agree it is unusual, Professor Choi said. But is it absurd? We are mathematicians. We understand that ability is not granted by certificates. It is proven by results. Min-jun has results, another professor spoke up. How do we know he did not simply copy solutions from textbooks or the internet? These could be memorized answers. They could be, Professor Choi acknowledged. Min-jun, would you be willing to solve a problem right now? One that none of us has seen before? So everyone can witness your process? Min-jun stood on shaking legs. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, I can try. Professor Choi went to the whiteboard at the front of the room. He wrote a complex problem involving differential equations and boundary conditions. It was a problem from his current research, unpublished. No one in this room except Professor Choi had seen it before. This is from my active research, Professor Choi said. I solved it last month. It took me 3 days. Min-jun has never seen it. Min-jun, please show us your approach. Min-jun approached the whiteboard. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely think. 23 professors watched him. They expected him to fail. They wanted him to fail so their world would make sense again. But Min-jun looked at the problem and something inside him calmed. This was mathematics. Mathematics was logical. Mathematics did not care about his job or his clothes or the doubts in this room. Mathematics only cared about truth. He picked up a marker and began to write. His hand steadied. He worked through the problem step by step, explaining his reasoning out loud as he went. The room was completely silent except for his voice and the squeak of the marker on the board. He transformed the differential equation using a technique from Fourier analysis. He applied the boundary conditions carefully. He solved the resulting system. The solution emerged gradually, built piece by piece through careful logic. 28 minutes later, Min-jun stepped back. The board was filled with his work. The solution was complete. Professor Choi stood and checked the work carefully. He compared it to his own solution from his research notes. After several minutes, he turned to face the faculty. "It is correct," he said quietly. "The approach is different from mine, but the solution is correct." He did this in 28 minutes. "It took me 3 days." The room erupted again, but this time the tone was different. Shock, disbelief, but also something else. A few professors looked impressed despite themselves. Dr. Park, the department head, stood up. She was a stern woman in her 60s. "This is extraordinary," she said. "Truly. But Professor Choi, what exactly are you proposing we do?" "We cannot give him a position. He has no degree. He has not been through our admissions process. There are policies. I am proposing we find a way," Professor Choi said. "We have exceptional circumstances clauses in our bylaws. We have precedent for recognizing unusual talent. We need to explore every option. Even if we wanted to help, the administration would never approve this," another professor said. "The Board of Trustees. The public. They would ask why we are giving special treatment to a janitor when qualified candidates with proper credentials are turned away every year. Because he is not just qualified," Professor Choi said, his voice rising with passion. "He is exceptional. How many people teach themselves to this level? How many could solve that problem in under 30 minutes? We claim to value merit. Here is pure merit. If we turn our backs on this, what does that say about us?" Ji-won, the graduate student, suddenly appeared at the door. She had been told to leave during the meeting, but she had been listening outside. She entered the room boldly. "Excuse me," she said. "I know I should not be here, but I heard what is happening, and I wanted to say that the students support Min-jun. I told a few classmates about this situation. Word spread. There are students gathering outside right now. They want to show their support." Dr. Park looked annoyed. "You had no right to discuss confidential faculty matters." "With respect, Dr. Park, this stopped being confidential when it became about justice," Ji-won said. "Mathematics is supposed to be about ideas, not about status. If we reject someone this talented because of his background, we are no better than the people who said women should not study mathematics, or the people who said poor people could not be scientists. We should be better than that." Through the conference room windows, movement could be seen. Students were indeed gathering outside the mathematics building. Some held hastily made signs. "Knowledge has no class requirements. Recognize true talent. Let Min-jun study." The professors looked at each other uneasily. The situation was spiraling beyond their control. What had started as a private faculty matter was becoming public. Dr. Kim spoke again. "Even with student support, the university administration will be the real obstacle. President Yoon is very conservative about policy. He will not want to set a precedent. He will worry about lawsuits from rejected applicants. Then we need to give him a reason to say yes," Professor Choi said. "Min-jun, may I show them your notebooks?" Min-jun nodded. He felt numb. Events were moving too fast. Professor Choi opened the bags and spread the 14 notebooks across the conference table. Professors began picking them up, flipping through pages. The room grew quiet again as they read. Page after page of complex mathematics, years of self-directed study. The quality of the work was undeniable. "This is graduate-level work," one professor muttered. "Some of this is beyond graduate level," another said. Dr. Park held one of the notebooks. She looked at Min-jun with a complicated expression. "Why did you never tell anyone? Why did you hide this?" Min-jun found his voice. "Who would have listened? I am just a janitor. I never finished high school. I have no right to call myself a mathematician. I kept my studies private, because I thought that was where they belonged. I never imagined—" He gestured at the room, at the students outside. "I never imagined any of this." Dr. Park was silent for a long moment. Then she closed the notebook carefully. "Professor Choi, you have put us in a very difficult position, but also an important one. Give me until Monday. I will speak with President Yoon. I will speak with the board. I cannot promise anything, but I will try to find a path forward. That is all I ask," Professor Choi said. The meeting adjourned. Professors filed out slowly, still processing what they had witnessed. Min-jun sat in his chair, exhausted. Professor Choi sat beside him. "You did well," Professor Choi said. "Very well. What happens now?" Min-jun asked. "Now we wait, and we hope that the people with power will do the right thing." Outside, the crowd of students had grown. When Min-jun and Professor Choi emerged from the building, a cheer went up. Ji-won approached them. "We are with you," she told Min-jun. "Whatever happens, you have allies now." Min-jun looked at the young faces surrounding him. Students who barely knew him, who had no reason to care about a middle-aged janitor. Yet they were here, supporting him. For the first time since this began, Min-jun allowed himself to feel something other than fear. He felt hope. The weekend passed slowly for Min-jun. News of the janitor mathematician had spread beyond the university. A local news website published an article on Saturday. By Sunday, national media outlets were calling. Reporters wanted interviews. Social media exploded with debates. Some people celebrated Min-jun as a hero. Others dismissed the story as fake or exaggerated. Min-jun stayed home and tried to ignore it all. But Seo-yeon showed him some of the comments on her phone. "Look at this one," she said, smiling. "A high school student says you inspired him to study harder. He says if you can teach yourself mathematics, he can pass his exams." But there were also harsh comments. People who said Min-jun was stealing opportunities from real students. People who questioned whether his mathematics was actually good. People who accused Professor Choi of running a publicity stunt. On Monday morning, Dr. Park sat in President Yoon's office. She had brought copies of Min-jun's notebooks and the verification work Professor Choi had done. President Yoon was a careful man in his late 50s. He had been president of Hanyang University for 6 years. He valued tradition and procedure. "This is highly irregular," President Yoon said, flipping through one of the notebooks. "We have admissions processes for a reason. Standards. If we make an exception for this man, we will face criticism. Other people will demand exceptions too." "I understand your concerns," Dr. Park said, "but consider the alternative. If we do nothing, we are essentially saying that talent only matters if it comes in the right package. That seems like a worse message to send." "What exactly are you proposing?" President Yoon asked. "A special research fellowship," Dr. Park said. "Not a formal student position. Not a degree program. A fellowship that recognizes exceptional contribution to mathematics. We give Min-jun access to resources, a small stipend, the ability to work with our faculty on research projects. We monitor his progress. If he continues to produce quality work, we help him eventually pursue formal credentials through a non-traditional path." President Yoon shook his head. "The Board of Trustees will never approve this. They will see it as setting a dangerous precedent. Then we need to make them see it differently," Dr. Park said. She leaned forward. "President Yoon, this university has an opportunity to be on the right side of history. We can be the institution that recognizes talent regardless of circumstance. That will bring us more positive attention than any marketing campaign. Students will want to come here. Donors will support us. We will be known as a place that values actual ability over credentials. Or we will be known as the place that makes exceptions when it is convenient." President Yoon countered. "What about the students who were rejected from our programs? The ones with proper credentials who still could not get in? How do we explain to them that a janitor with no high school diploma gets special treatment? We explain that this is not about bypassing standards. It is about recognizing that standards can be met in different ways. Min-jun has the equivalent of graduate-level knowledge. He proved it. Multiple professors verified his work. We are not lowering our standards. We are broadening our definition of how someone can meet them." President Yoon was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I will present this to the board. But I need something more.
I need external validation."
If this man is truly as talented as Professor Choi claims, then other experts in the field should confirm it. Get someone from Seoul National University to review his work. Someone with no connection to our institution. Someone whose opinion carries weight. If they verify that Min-jun is the real thing, I will fight for this fellowship. If they do not, this ends here." Dr. Park agreed. That afternoon, she contacted Professor Kang Dae-hyun at Seoul National University. Professor Kang was one of the most respected mathematicians in Korea. He had published in top journals worldwide. He had served on international mathematical committees. If anyone could provide the external validation they needed, it was him. Professor Kang was initially skeptical when Dr. Park explained the situation over the phone. "A self-taught janitor," he said. "That sounds like a story from a movie, not real life." "I thought so too," Dr. Park admitted. "But I have seen his work. I watched him solve a problem in real time. I am not easily impressed, Professor Kang. This is real. Send me everything. Professor Kang said. I will review it. But I will be thorough. If this is not legitimate, I will say so publicly. I would expect nothing less, Dr. Park said. The next day, Professor Kang received a package containing Min Jun's 14 notebooks, Professor Choi's verification notes, and video footage of Min Jun solving the problem during the faculty meeting. Professor Kang spent Tuesday evening and all of Wednesday reviewing the materials. What he found astonished him. The notebooks showed a progression of learning that was systematic and deep. The early notebooks covered basic calculus and linear algebra, but they were not just copied textbook solutions. Min Jun had worked through problems, made mistakes, corrected himself. He had developed his own understanding through trial and error. The later notebooks showed increasingly sophisticated mathematics. Differential equations, abstract algebra, real analysis, topology. The work was organized and careful. It showed genuine understanding, not memorization. Most impressive were the original explorations. In several notebooks, Min Jun had posed his own questions and worked through them. Some of these explorations touched on active areas of research. One problem related to optimization techniques was remarkably close to work that Professor Kang himself had published 2 years ago. Min Jun had independently arrived at similar insights. On Thursday morning, Professor Kang called Dr. Park. I will come to Hanyang University tomorrow, he said. I want to meet this man myself. I want to speak with him about his work. If he can explain his thinking to me directly, I will write a letter of support. This is not a publicity stunt. This is a genuine mathematical mind. The news that Professor Kang was coming spread quickly through the mathematics department. Friday afternoon, a small group gathered in a seminar room. Professor Kang sat at one end of a table. Min Jun sat at the other end. Between them sat Dr. Park, Professor Choi, and several other faculty members. Professor Kang wasted no time. Min Jun, I have reviewed your notebooks. The quality of your work is undeniable, but I need to understand how you think. I am going to ask you questions about your approaches to certain problems, not to test whether you memorized anything, to see if you truly understand what you have learned. Is that acceptable? Min Jun nodded. He was nervous but less terrified than before. He was beginning to understand that these people were not trying to expose him as a fraud. They were trying to help him. They just needed to be sure. For 2 hours, Professor Kang questioned Min Jun about his mathematical thinking. He asked about specific techniques. He posed hypothetical variations of problems. He challenged Min Jun to explain concepts in different ways. Min Jun answered carefully. When he did not know something, he admitted it. When he was uncertain, he said so. But on the topics he had studied deeply, his answers were clear and confident. He explained his reasoning. He drew diagrams when words were not enough. He made connections between different areas of mathematics. Professor Kang listened intently. He took notes. Occasionally, he smiled or nodded. As the session continued, his expression changed from skeptical to impressed to genuinely excited. Finally, Professor Kang sat back. Tell me something, Min Jun. Why mathematics? You could have taught yourself many things. History, literature, languages. Why did you choose something so difficult? Min Jun thought about the question. Mathematics has rules, he said slowly. If you follow the rules correctly, you get the right answer. It does not matter who you are. It does not matter if you are rich or poor. It does not matter if you went to a good school or no school. The mathematics does not care. 2 + 2 = 4 for everyone. That felt fair to me. It felt like something I could do, even though I had nothing else. Professor Kang's eyes glistened. That is the best reason I have ever heard. Thank you for your honesty. He turned to Dr. Park. I will write your letter, but more than that, I want to propose something additional. What is that? Dr. Park asked. I want to co-supervise Min Jun's research, Professor Kang said. Whatever fellowship program you create, I want to be involved. This man has taught himself more than most of my graduate students know. Imagine what he could do with proper guidance and resources. I want to be part of that. The room broke into excited conversation. Professor Choi looked emotional. Dr. Park allowed herself a small smile. Even the other professors who had been skeptical seemed moved by Professor Kang's words. Min Jun sat quietly, trying to process what was happening. A professor from Seoul National University wanted to supervise his work, wanted to help him. This man who had never met him before today. The following week, President Yoon called an emergency board meeting. He presented Dr. Park's proposal, supported by Professor Kang's letter. The letter was 5 pages long and detailed Professor Kang's assessment of Min-jun's abilities. It concluded with a strong recommendation that the university create a special program to support Min-jun's development. The board members debated for 3 hours. Some remained opposed. They worried about precedent, they worried about public perception, but others were swayed by Professor Kang's reputation and words. If one of Korea's top mathematicians believed in Min-jun, could they afford to dismiss him? In the end, the vote was 8-4 in favor of creating the fellowship program. They called it the Exceptional Scholars Initiative. Min-jun would be the first recipient. He would receive a stipend equal to a graduate student's salary. He would have access to the university's resources. He would work under the joint supervision of Professor Choi and Professor Kang. The program would be reviewed annually. Additionally, the board approved a pathway for Min-jun to eventually earn formal credentials through equivalency examinations and portfolio review. If he continued to demonstrate his abilities, he could eventually receive recognition equivalent to a bachelor's and master's degree without taking traditional classes. On Monday morning, Dr. Park called Min-jun into her office. Professor Choi was there too. She told Min-jun about the board's decision. Min-jun cried. He was not embarrassed. These were tears of relief and gratitude. For 23 years he had studied in secret, believing his mathematics would never matter to anyone but himself. Now he was being given a chance to use his knowledge, to contribute, to be recognized not despite who he was but because of what he could do. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "We should be thanking you," Dr. Park said. "You reminded us what universities are supposed to be about. Not just credentials and procedures, but actual learning, actual ability. You made us better by challenging us to look beyond our assumptions." Professor Choi put a hand on Min-jun's shoulder. "Your real journey begins now. Are you ready?" Min-jun wiped his tears and nodded. "I am ready." Outside the administration building, Ji-won and a group of students waited. When Min-jun emerged with the news, they cheered. Some of them hugged him, others shook his hand. A few asked for his autograph, which made Min-jun laugh. "I am still just a janitor," he said. "No," Ji-won corrected him. "You are a mathematician. You always were. Now everyone else knows it too." 6 months passed quickly. Min-jun now worked in a small office on the 3rd floor of the mathematics building. The office had been a storage room before they cleared it out for him. It was not fancy, just a desk, a chair, a computer, and a whiteboard. But to Min-jun, it was the most beautiful room in the world. He no longer worked as a janitor. His fellowship stipend was enough to support his family. So-yeon had cried when he brought home his first payment. "You can rest now," she had said. But Min-jun did not want to rest. He wanted to work, to learn, to contribute. Professor Choi and Professor Kang met with him twice a week. They guided his research. They recommended papers for him to read. They challenged him with new problems. Min-jun absorbed everything like a plant that had finally found sunlight after years in the shade. His first research paper was now complete. It was based on the fluid dynamics optimization problem he had solved on Professor Choi's whiteboard. Professor Choi had encouraged Min-jun to expand the solution into a full paper. Together, they had developed it into a comprehensive study of optimization techniques for certain classes of differential equations. The paper had been submitted to the Journal of Computational Mathematics, a prestigious international publication. After 3 months of peer review, the acceptance letter arrived in April. The paper would be published in the summer issue. Professor Choi showed Min-jun the acceptance letter. "Your name will be in academic journals now," he said. "Your work will be cited by other researchers. You are officially part of the mathematical community." Min-jun read the letter 3 times. He still could not quite believe it. His name, his mathematics, published for the world to see. In May, Min-jun received an invitation that terrified him. The International Conference on Applied Mathematics was being held in Singapore in June. The organizers had read an advance copy of his paper. They wanted him to present his research at the conference. "I cannot do this," Min-jun told Professor Choi. "I have never been to a conference. I have never given a presentation. I will embarrass myself." "You will not," Professor Choi said firmly. "We will practice. You will rehearse your presentation until you know it perfectly, and I will be there with you. You are ready for this, Min-jun." They spent 3 weeks preparing. Min-jun practiced his presentation over and over. At first, he stumbled over his words. He forgot to explain important steps. He spoke too quietly, but gradually he improved. Professor Choi gave him feedback. Ji-won and other graduate students sat through his practice presentations and asked questions. By the time June arrived, Min-jun's presentation was polished. He knew his material completely. He could explain his work clearly. But he was still nervous as he boarded the plane to Singapore. The conference was held at a large hotel near the city center. Hundreds of mathematicians from around the world attended. Min-jun felt out of place among them. They wore expensive suits. They spoke confidently about their research. They had PhDs from famous universities. He was just a former janitor with a fellowship. But when Min-jun stepped onto the stage to give his presentation, something changed. He looked out at the audience. He saw people who loved mathematics just as he did. People who had devoted their lives to understanding the world through numbers. In that moment, he realized he belonged here. Not because of his credentials, because of his work. Min-jun delivered his presentation clearly and confidently. He explained his optimization technique. He showed how it could be applied to real engineering problems. He answered questions from the audience with careful thought. When he finished, the applause was genuine. Several mathematicians approached him afterward. They wanted to discuss his work. They wanted to explore collaborations. One professor from MIT said his technique could be useful for aerospace applications. Another professor from Oxford said she was working on related problems and wanted to stay in touch. Min-jun left Singapore feeling transformed. He was no longer hiding. He was participating, contributing, being recognized for what he could do. Back at Hanyang University, changes were happening. The publicity around Min-jun's story had brought attention to the issue of non-traditional students. The university received inquiries from other people who had taught themselves advanced subjects but lacked formal credentials. Some had learned computer science. Others had mastered physics or chemistry. They asked if there might be opportunities for them too. In August, the university announced an expansion of the Exceptional Scholars Initiative. They would now consider applications from anyone who could demonstrate mastery of a subject through portfolio review and examination, regardless of their educational background. The program would be small and highly selective, but it would exist. Min-jun was asked to help review some of the applications. It felt surreal to be on the other side now, to be someone who evaluated others' work. He tried to be fair and thorough. He remembered how terrified he had been when he was in their position. In September, Min-jun began working toward his formal degree. The university had created a special track for him. He would take equivalency exams for core courses. For his areas of expertise, his published work and portfolio would count toward degree requirements. For areas he had not studied deeply, he would take actual classes alongside traditional students. It was strange sitting in a classroom as a student at age 43. But Min-jun loved it. He loved being able to ask questions openly. He loved discussing mathematics with classmates. He loved having access to professors who could explain things he had struggled to understand on his own. The younger students were kind to him. Some were intimidated at first. They knew his story. They knew he had published research. But Min-jun was humble and friendly. He studied with them. He helped them when they struggled with concepts he understood well. He asked for their help when they knew things he did not. Gradually, they accepted him as one of them. Ji-won remained his closest friend in the program. She was working on her doctorate now. They often studied together in the library. She teased him about his old-fashioned note-taking methods. He teased her about her reliance on computer programs for calculations. In November, something unexpected happened. Min-jun was invited to speak at a local high school. The school was in a poor neighborhood similar to where Min-jun had grown up. The principal had read about Min-jun's story. She asked if he would talk to the students about education and opportunity. Min-jun agreed. He stood before 200 high school students in a cramped auditorium. Many looked bored. Some were clearly only there because attendance was mandatory. Min-jun understood. He had been that kind of student once. I am not here to tell you that education is easy, Min-jun began. I am not here to say that if you just try hard enough, everything will work out. Life is more complicated than that. I dropped out of high school because my family needed money. That was the reality I faced. I do not regret that choice. My family survived because of it. The students were paying attention now. This was not the usual motivational speech. But I want to tell you something important, Min-jun continued. Leaving school does not mean leaving education. I kept learning. I studied at libraries. I bought used textbooks with money I should have spent on other things. I learned because I loved mathematics, not because someone told me I had to. That made all the difference. He told them his story, the years of studying alone, the fear of revealing his knowledge, the moment Professor Choi discovered him, the struggle to be recognized. The students listened quietly. You might think you need permission to learn, Min-jun said. You need to be enrolled in the right school. You need to have money for classes. You need to wait until circumstances are perfect. But that is not true. Knowledge is free. Libraries exist. The internet exists. If you want to learn something, you can start today, not next year, not when you have money. Today, a hand went up, a girl in the back row. But what is the point? Even if we learn something on our own, no one will care. We do not have degrees. We are not from rich families. The system does not work for people like us. Min-jun nodded. You are right. The system is not fair. I was lucky. I was lucky that Professor Choi saw my work. I was lucky that people fought for me. Not everyone gets that chance. But here is what I learned. You cannot control whether the system will recognize you. You can only control whether you develop your abilities. If you never build your skills, you definitely will not get opportunities. If you do build them, maybe you will. Maybe not. But at least you will have tried. At least you will have grown. That is worth something, even if no one else sees it. After his talk, several students approached him. They asked questions. They told him their own stories. One boy wanted to be an engineer, but his family could not afford university. A girl loved physics, but her teachers said she was not smart enough. Min-jun listened to each of them. He gave them reading recommendations. He told them about free online courses. He encouraged them to keep learning no matter what obstacles they faced. As Min-jun left the school, the principal thanked him. You gave them hope, she said. That matters. I hope I gave them more than hope, Min-jun said. I hope I gave them permission to learn without waiting for someone to tell them they are allowed to. That evening, Min-jun thought about how far he had come. A year ago, he had been cleaning offices in secret, stealing glimpses of mathematics he thought he would never truly be part of. Now he had published research. He had presented at an international conference. He was working toward a formal degree. He was teaching evening classes to working adults who wanted to learn mathematics. But the biggest change was internal. Min-jun no longer felt like he was pretending. He no longer felt like an imposter in the world of mathematics. He was a mathematician, not because a university said so, because his work proved it, because his passion drove it, because he had earned it through 24 years of dedication. In December, Professor Kang invited Min-jun to Seoul National University. He wanted Min-jun to give a seminar talk about his research. Min-jun stood before graduate students and faculty at one of Korea's most prestigious institutions. He presented his work confidently. He answered challenging questions. He held his own among people with PhDs and decades of experience. After the seminar, a young graduate student approached Min-jun shyly. I am from a poor family too, she said quietly. I almost did not apply to graduate school because I thought I did not belong. But your story gave me courage. Thank you for showing us that there are different paths. Min-jun felt tears in his eyes. This was why it all mattered, not just his own journey, but what it meant for others. Every time he spoke publicly, every time his story was shared, it opened possibilities for someone else. It challenged the assumption that intelligence and ability belonged only to certain types of people. 2 years later, Minjun completed his equivalency examinations. The university reviewed his portfolio of published research and approved his credentials. He received formal recognition equivalent to a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in mathematics. There was no graduation ceremony for him, no cap and gown, but Professor Choi and Professor Kang took him out to dinner to celebrate. "So what comes next?" Professor Kang asked. "Will you pursue a doctorate?" Minjun smiled. "Maybe. But first I want to teach more. I want to develop programs for non-traditional students, people who learned like I did, people who need a different path. I want to help build that path." Professor Choi raised his glass. "To Minjun, who taught us that talent can be found anywhere if we just have the courage to look." They drank together, 3 mathematicians from very different backgrounds, united by their love of knowledge and their belief that ability matters more than credentials. Today, Minjun is an adjunct professor at Hanyang University. He teaches evening classes for working adults. He continues his research in applied mathematics. He has published 7 papers in peer-reviewed journals. He mentors students who come from difficult circumstances. He still visits his old neighborhood sometimes. He stops by the library where he first fell in love with mathematics. The building is old and the books are worn, but it is still there, still offering knowledge to anyone who wants it. Minjun often tells his students, "I am not special. I am just someone who refused to stop learning." You can do the same. The mathematics does not care where you come from. It only cares whether you understand it, and understanding is available to everyone. The Exceptional Scholars Initiative that began with Minjun has grown. 23 people have now completed the program. They come from all backgrounds: former factory workers, single parents, people with disabilities, refugees. Each one brought skills they had developed on their own. Each one was given a chance to prove their abilities. The initiative has inspired similar programs at other universities in Korea, then in other countries. The conversation about education and opportunity has changed. People are questioning old assumptions about who deserves access to knowledge. Minjun's journey began with a formula on a whiteboard. A small act of courage, writing his solution where someone might see it. That moment changed his life. But more importantly, it changed many other lives too. It reminded the world that genius can be found anywhere, that talent is not limited by circumstance. That knowledge belongs to everyone who seeks it. On quiet evenings, Minjun still takes out his old notebooks. The 14 notebooks that contain 23 years of his life. He flips through the pages, remembering the loneliness of studying alone, the frustration of not having anyone to discuss ideas with, the fear that his mathematics would never matter. But it did matter. It mattered profoundly, not just because he solved problems, because he proved something essential. That ability is not granted by institutions. It is developed by individuals. That learning is not something that happens to you in a classroom. It is something you do for yourself, every day regardless of your circumstances. Minjun no longer cleans offices late at night, but he still arrives at the university early. He still works on his problems with the same careful dedication. He still gets excited when he discovers something new, and every time he teaches a class, every time he helps a non-traditional student navigate the system, every time he challenges someone's assumptions about who can be a mathematician, he honors the journey that brought him here, from janitor to mathematician, from hiding to recognition, from doubt to confidence, not because the system was designed to help him, but because he refused to let the system define him. And that is the real discovery that shook the university. Not a formula, not a solution, but the truth that human potential cannot be contained by labels or limited by circumstance. It will find a way to emerge. All it needs is a chance.